The wind cut like a blade across the frostbit dirt of Cold Hollow's Main Street. On the crude auction block, three sisters huddled. Hannah, 15, shielding her younger siblings. Sarah, 13, eyes blazing defiance through tears. Rose, 9, trembling violently. Greedy eyes measured them like livestock. Then a shadow moved from the saloon's edge. A solitary man, face etched with old grief, stepped forward. His bid was low, firm, final. He bought them all, not for profit, not for labor, for a reason no soul in that frozen town could fathom or dare to name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I got something extra special saved just for you. The auctioneer's voice, a nasal drone sharpened by the cold, sliced through the brittle air. Lot 17, able-bodied females, good for service, farm work, or companionship. A rough chuckle rippled through the cluster of men stamping their boots against the late October chill. Their breath hung in plumes, obscuring faces hardened by frontier life and indifference. Frost glistened on the worn planks beneath the sisters' thin shoes. Hannah tightened her arms around Rose, pulling her back against her skirts, feeling the child's frantic heartbeat against her ribs. Sarah stood rigid beside them, chin lifted, but her knuckles were white where she clutched Hannah's sleeve. Her gaze darted over the crowd. The florid-faced rancher, the weasel-eyed clerk from the mercantile, the stoic sheriff leaning against the post, his expression unreadable. Fear was a sour taste in Hannah's mouth, metallic and choking. Orphaned by a wagon accident just weeks prior, their meager inheritance swallowed by debts they hadn't known existed. This was the end of the road. Sold. Separated. The thought was a physical blow. Amos Reed watched from the deeper shadow cast by the overhang of the two-bit saloon. He hadn't planned on being here. The memory of another cold day, another loss. The small grave dug behind his cabin as winter closed in was a raw wound scraped open by the sight of the girls. Clara, his Clara, taken by the fever. The emptiness in his cabin echoed louder than the auctioneer's shouts. He'd come for supplies, salt and bullets, drawn by the unusual crowd. Now he couldn't look away. Hannah's desperate protectiveness, Sarah's fierce, futile glare, Rose's silent terror. It mirrored a pain he knew too well. It wasn't calculation that moved him, but a deep, resonant ache, a vow whispered to the wind over a lonely grave. Never again, not if I can stop it. The bidding started low, hesitant. The rancher offered $5 for Hannah alone. Strong back, he grunted. The clerk smirked, countering for Sarah. Sharp eyes, good for accounts. Rose elicited pitying murmurs, but no immediate bids. Hannah's stomach clenched. Separation was certain. Despair threatened to buckle her knees. That's when Amos stepped into the weak sunlight filtering through scudding gray clouds. He moved deliberately, boots crunching on the frozen mud. His worn duster was patched, his face weathered beneath the brim of a faded hat, eyes shadowed and intense. $10, Amos stated, his voice low but carrying, rough like stones grinding together. For all three. A stunned silence fell, broken only by the restless snort of a tethered horse. The auctioneer blinked. All three, mister? $10 total. He scanned the crowd, expecting a counter. The rancher frowned, spat. The clerk shrugged, losing interest. It was a pittance, barely covering the lawyer's claimed expenses for arranging disposal of the orphans. Sheriff Holt pushed off his post, his hand resting casually near his holstered coat. His gaze, sharp and assessing, locked onto Amos. $10, Amos repeated, pulling a worn leather pouch from his coat pocket. He didn't look at the sisters. His focus was on the coins he counted out onto the auctioneer's rickety table. Silver dollars, cold and bright, paid in full. The auctioneer hesitated, glancing at the sheriff. Holt gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Sold, the auctioneer declared, slapping the table. The sound made Rose flinch violently. To the gentleman here. Papers signed and settled. Amos tucked the pouch away, and finally turned to the girls. He met Hannah's wide, terrified eyes. Her arms tightened around Rose. Sarah edged half in front of them, a small, trembling shield. He saw the ingrained distrust, the expectation of cruelty. It stung, but he understood. He gestured toward the street where a sturdy, if weathered, buckboard waited, hitched to a placid bay mare. "My wagon's there," he said, his voice devoid of warmth but lacking malice. "Gather your things." He saw the question forming on Hannah's lips. What things? They had nothing but the threadbare clothes they stood in. He saw the faded blue ribbon tied clumsily in Rose's hair, the only spot of color against the drab browns and grays. A tiny, fragile claim on identity. He looked away, toward the wagon. "Come on." As they shuffled forward, Hannah guiding Rose, Sarah trailing like a wary shadow, Sheriff Holt stepped into their path. He wasn't a tall man, but solid, radiating quiet authority. His eyes, a pale blue like winter ice, scanned Amos, then the girls. "Reed." He acknowledged, his tone neutral. "Didn't figure you for a man needing hired help. Or company." Amos met his gaze levelly. "Didn't figure I'd find children on the block, Sheriff." The words were flat, but the underlying reproach was clear. Holt's expression didn't change. "Times are hard. Lawyer Tate arranged it. Said it was legal. Debts owed." He paused, letting the implication hang. Debts Amos might now be responsible for. His eyes flickered over the sisters huddled behind Amos. "Taking them out to your place? That's a lonesome stretch." "It's shelter," Amos stated simply. He made to move past. Holt shifted slightly, blocking him still. His voice dropped, pitched for Amos alone, though Hannah strained to hear. "Just mind your business out there, Reed. Tate's got papers. He represents interests, powerful interests back east who held those debts. Silas Rackham handles his local affairs. Man expects what's owed." He let the name, Silas Rackham, hang in the frigid air. It meant nothing to the sisters, but Amos's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Rackham, a name whispered with fear, associated with sudden disappearances and broken men. "Wouldn't want any misunderstanding," Holt added, a subtle threat woven into the concern, especially with new responsibilities. He finally stepped aside, his gaze lingering on the girls with an unsettling mixture of pity and calculation. "Good luck." Amos didn't reply. He herded the girls toward the buckboard with silent urgency. Hannah helped Rose clamber up onto the hard wooden bench. Sarah scrambled up after, pressing close to her older sister. Amos untied the reins, his movements economical, his back stiff. He could feel the sheriff's eyes and others boring into him. He could feel the weight of the girls' terrified silence. He flicked the reins. The bay mare started forward with a jolt. The wagon wheels creaked over the frozen ruts, carrying them away from the gauntlet of Cold Hollow's Main Street, past the last leaning shack, and onto the open trail, winding into the vast, empty hills. The wind bit sharper out here, scoured clean of the town's stench of coal smoke and unwashed humanity. It carried the scent of snow on the air, pine resin, and cold, hard earth. The silence stretched, broken only by the rhythmic clop of hooves, the groan of the wagon, and Rose's muffled sniffles. Hannah stared straight ahead, her arm rigid around her youngest sister. Sarah watched Amos's back, her young face a mask of suspicion etched on a bone-deep exhaustion. Miles passed, marked by skeletal cottonwoods and endless, rolling grasslands bleached pale gold by the approaching winter. The isolation was immense, pressing in from all sides. Amos felt it, a familiar companion, now amplified by the three fragile lives entrusted, or perhaps trapped, with him. Finally, as the weak sun began its descent, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, they rounded a bend. Nestled in a shallow valley, sheltered by a stand of pines, stood a low log cabin. Smoke curled thinly from a stone chimney. A small corral held two sturdy-looking workhorses. A weathered barn leaned companionably nearby. It wasn't much, but it was solid, a place built for solitude, not a family. Amos reined in the mare near the cabin door. The sudden stillness was profound. He set the brake, the sound loud in the quiet. He turned, finally looking fully at the three faces staring back at him, pale in the fading light. Fear, exhaustion, and a desperate, fragile hope wore in their eyes. Hannah swallowed hard, her voice barely a whisper, cracked and raw from disuse and cold. It wasn't about shelter or food or the immediate fear of the auction block. It cut to the terrifying core of their new reality, echoing the unspoken question in Amos's own heart. Why? Hannah asked, the single word hanging heavy in the freezing air. Why did you buy us, mister? Her gaze locked onto his, demanding an answer he wasn't sure he could give. Not yet. The ribbon in Rose's hair fluttered weakly in the bitter wind. Inside the cabin, unseen, a single oil lamp cast a small, uncertain circle of light against the encroaching Montana dark. Somewhere out there, Sheriff Holt's warning about Silas Rackham and Lawyer Tate's powerful interest hung like a gathering storm. Amos stared at Hannah, her question, why, hanging like ice in the air. The wind snatched at Rose's blue ribbon, the fragile scrap of color stark against the cabin's weathered logs. Inside, the oil lamp's meager glow pulsed against the deepening twilight. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. Lost a child once, he said, gaze fixed on the ribbon, not Hannah's eyes. Fever. He didn't say Clara's name. Couldn't. The memory was a physical pressure behind his ribs, colder than the Montana night. Ain't right. Kids on a block. He turned abruptly, shoving the cabin door open. Shelter's better than frostbite. Get inside. The cabin was a single room, dominated by a stone fireplace where embers glowed dully. The air smelled of wood smoke, cured leather, and the lingering tang of loneliness. A narrow rope bed stood against one wall, a scarred table and two stools against another. Amos's few possessions, a rifle above the mantel, a worn Bible, a chipped enamel cup, spoke of a life pared down to necessity. Hannah herded Sarah and Rose toward the hearth's feeble warmth. Rose pressed her face into Hannah's skirt, her small body trembling. Sarah scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the rifle, then flicking distrustfully to Amos's back as he lit another lamp. Bed's yours, Amos stated, banking the fire. He dragged a pile of furs and a worn wool blanket near the hearthstone for himself. Ain't much, but it's dry. He tossed another log onto the embers. Sparks flew upward like fleeing stars. Hannah hesitated, then guided Rose to bed. Sarah stood rigid, arms crossed. We ain't charity, she declared, her voice tight. We can work. Amos didn't look at her. He filled a blackened kettle from a water barrel. Morning comes early. Rest. He set the kettle on the stove. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken fear and Amos's own gnawing doubt. What have I done? Dragged him into my solitude and Tate's shadow. Dawn crept gray and reluctant over the pine-clad hills. Frost etched intricate, brittle patterns on the cabin's single window. Amos was already outside, checking the snares he'd set before the auction. The silence of the valley was profound, broken only by the crunch of his boots on frozen grass and the distant cry of a raven. He found two snowshoe hares, stiff and cold. As he turned back toward the cabin, movement near the creek caught his eye. Tracks boot prints, too large to be his own, pressed deep into the muddy bank where the ice hadn't fully formed. Fresh. They led from the tree line, circled the corral where his horses shifted uneasily, then vanished back into pines. Amos's hand instinctively dropped to the Colt at his hip. Rackham's men. Scouting. Already, Holt's warning echoed. Powerful interests. Expect what's owed. The isolation of his homestead suddenly felt like a trap. Inside, the girls were awake. Hannah was attempting to coax a flame under the kettle. Rose huddled on the bed, clutching her ribbon. Sarah watched Amos enter, her eyes sharp. Who was out there? She asked. She'd seen him tense at the window. Amos ignored the question for the moment. He laid the hares on the table. Breakfast, he said curtly. To Hannah, fire needs smaller kindling first. Birch bark catches quick. He demonstrated, his large hand surprisingly deft. Hannah watched intently, then mimicked him. A small, fragile flame finally licked upward. While the stew simmered, Amos took his rifle. "Stay inside," he ordered, his voice low. Sarah latched the door behind me. Her eyes widened slightly at the command, but she nodded, a flicker of grim understanding replacing some suspicion. He walked the perimeter again, studying the intruder's tracks with a tracker's cold focus. They weren't subtle. A message. We know where you are. Days settled into a tense, watchful rhythm. Amos assigned tasks, grounding them in purpose. Hannah learned the stove, the careful balance of wood and heat. He showed her the root cellar, its earthy coolness holding potatoes, carrots, and jars of last summer's preserves. Sarah, despite her bristling pride, was tasked with fetching water from the creek. Amos watched her from the porch, rifle resting across his knees, scanning the tree-line. She carried the heavy bucket with fierce determination, her eyes also scanning the shadows, the defiance hardening into vigilance. Rose stayed close to Hannah, but Amos carved a small, smooth piece of pine into a rough horse shape one evening by the fire. He didn't hand it to her, just set it on the table near her. Later, he saw her small fingers tracing its curves. Trust was a slow thaw. They ate Amos's simple meals in near silence. Hannah served Rose first, always testing the heat of the stew. Sarah ate quickly, watching Amos. Rose clutched her carved horse and her ribbon. One afternoon, while Hannah chopped vegetables, Rose spoke unexpectedly, her voice a tiny whisper aimed at the wooden horse. Mama had a ribbon box, pink silk, like flowers. Hannah's chopping stilled. Sarah looked up sharply from mending a tear in her only other dress. Amos, whittling another piece of wood near the hearth, kept his eyes down but listened. It fell, Rose continued, her eyes distant, glazed with remembered terror. The wagon, it tipped, down the ravine. The box, it opened. Ribbons flew like birds. A tear traced a path through the dust on her cheek. Everything flew. Mama, Papa. She buried her face in Hannah's apron. Hannah dropped the knife, pulling Rose close. Her own composure cracked, a raw sob escaping. "Debts," she choked out, looking not at Rose but at Amos, as if daring him to dismiss their loss. Papa borrowed from the bank in Helena for seed. Lawyer Tate, he said the bank sold the debt to someone. Silas Rackham, he said we belonged to repay it. Her voice was thick with tears and rage. Said the auction was legal. Said nobody wanted three useless girls together. She held Rose tighter, her gaze locking onto Amos. "You bought the debt too, Mr. Reed. You bought trouble." The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. Amos stopped whittling. He saw the ribbons in his mind, bright against the darkness of a ravine. He saw Clara's small, fever-flushed face. Belonged to repay it. The casual cruelty of it burned. He understood Lawyer Tate's legal arrangement now. Debt slavery, thinly veiled. Rackham didn't just want money. He wanted control, assets, and Amos had stolen them. A week passed. The tracks didn't reappear, but the unseen threat coiled tighter. Amos taught Sarah how to hold the rifle safely, how to sight down the barrel. "Point only at what you aim to kill," he said grimly. Hannah learned to make simple biscuits. Rose began a venture just outside the door, the carved horse always in her pocket, her ribbon tied securely in her hair. She watched Amos mend harness leather with intense, silent focus. One brittle cold afternoon, Amos was splitting wood near the barn. Hannah carried an armful of kindling toward the cabin. Sarah was at the creek. Suddenly, Sarah's voice rang out, sharp and clear, carrying on the still air not a scream, but a warning cry. "Hannah, get inside." Amos dropped the axe, drawing his colt in one fluid motion. He sprinted toward the creek. Sarah stood frozen halfway back to the cabin, pointing upstream. A rider, not Sheriff Holt, A stranger on a dusty paint horse had emerged from the pines. He was thick-set, wearing a long, greasy duster, his face shadowed by a slouch hat pulled low. He reined in about 50 yards away, his posture relaxed but watchful, like a predator assessing prey. Amos positioned himself between the strange and the girls, his Colt held low but ready. Hannah had shoved Rose behind her in the cabin doorway. The stranger didn't dismount. He spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the frozen ground. His voice, when it came, was a gravelly drawl, devoid of warmth. "Amos Reed." Amos didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the man's hands, resting on the saddle horn. "Name's Coulter. Work for Mr. Rackham." He paused, letting the name hang. "Heard you took on some property. Got concerned. Wanted to see you was caring for your investments proper-like." Coulter's gaze slid past Amos, lingering on Hannah and Rose in the doorway, then scanning toward Sarah, who stood rigid, fists clenched. A slow, unpleasant smile spread beneath the hat brim. "Looks like you got your hands full, Reed. Mr. Rackham, he's a patient man, mostly, but he expects what's owed. One way." His eyes flickered back to the girls. "Or another." He touched his hat brim mockingly. "Just a friendly visit. Welcome to the neighborhood." He wheeled the paint horse around and nudged it back into the trees, disappearing as silently as he'd come. Amos slowly lowered the Colt, his knuckles white on the grip. The silence rushed back, thick and charged. Sarah ran to Hannah and Rose, her face pale. Hannah met Amos's eyes. The fragile routine of the past days lay shattered. Coulter's words weren't just a threat. They were a promise. The debt wasn't settled. The auction hadn't been the end. Rackham hadn't forgotten. And now, he knew exactly where to find them. The carved horse fell heavy in Rose's pocket. The blue ribbon in her hair was no longer just memory. It felt like a target. The wilderness around the cabin no longer felt like shelter. It felt like the walls of a cage, and the bars had just been rattled. The silence after Coulter's departure thickened, broken only by the wind whistling through the pines like a knife on bone. Rose's small hand crept into her pocket, fingers tightening around the carved wooden horse. Hannah pulled both sisters inside, bolting the cabin door with hands that shook only slightly. Sarah stood rigid, staring at the spot where Coulter had vanished, her jaw set. Amos scanned the treeline, Colt still drawn, his knuckles white. The cabin's walls, once a refuge, now felt thin as paper. Rackham's message was clear. "We see you. We own you." That night, Amos didn't sleep. He sat by the single window, rifle across his lap, watching moonlight bleach the frostbitten grass silver. Every rustle of branches, every creak of settling timber, echoed like a footstep. Inside, the sisters huddled on the rope bed. Rose clutched her ribbon and horse, pressed between Hannah and Sarah. Hannah stared into the darkness, her breathing shallow, while Sarah's hand rested near the heart's edge, inches from the iron poker. The firelight flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands. At dawn, Amos began reinforcing the cabin. He dragged heavy logs to brace the door, hammered thick wooden shutters over the windows, and set crude tripwires of twine and tin cans around the perimeter. Sarah watched him, silent at first, then fetched nails without being asked. Her movements were sharp, efficient. When Amos paused to wipe sweat from his brow, she pointed to a gap beneath the porch. They could crawl under there. Her voice was flat, practical. Amos nodded, handing her a hatchet. "Cut pine boughs. Thick ones." It was the first task he'd given her that held the weight of defense. She took the hatchet, her expression grimly satisfied. Hannah tended the stove, stirring porridge with mechanical precision. Rose sat nearby, tracing the carved horse's mane. Suddenly, Hannah froze. Her hand went to her throat, hidden beneath her dress collar. She withdrew a small, tarnished locket on a frayed string. It clicked open with a sigh. Inside, a blurred tintype showed a man and woman, her parents, smiling against a painted studio backdrop. Tucked beside it was a scrap of paper brittle and yellowed. Hannah's voice was a whisper, meant for Rose but loud enough for Amos to catch. Papa kept this. From the bank. She smoothed the paper. Amos glimpsed spidery handwriting. $287.50 owed to Helena Savings and Trust, lien on property and chattel. Below, in fresher ink, transfer to S. Rackham, October 1887. Hannah snapped the locket shut. Tate said chattel meant us. Amos absorbed this. Debt slavery, legalized by ink and greed. Rackham didn't just want repayment. He wanted dominion. The locket wasn't just memory, it was proof. He met Hannah's eyes. Keep that hidden. For the first time, she didn't look away. A fragile thread of understanding stretched between them. Supplies dwindled. Salt, flour, ammunition. They couldn't last a winter without a trip to Cold Hollow. Amos knew it was a trap waiting to be sprung. Sarah comes with me, he announced 2 mornings later. Her eyes flashed, part fear, part fierce pride. He needed her sharp eyes. She knew Coulter's face. Hannah protested, clutching Rose. What if they come while you're gone? Amos handed her his second Colt, a heavy Navy revolver. Bar the door. Shoot anything that tries to break in. Her fingers trembled on the grip, but she nodded, pulling Rose closer. Rose pressed the carved horse into Hannah's free hand. For luck, she whispered. The ride to town was tense. Snow began to fall, sparse flakes like ash against the gray sky. Sarah sat rigid beside Amos on the buckboard bench, scanning every shadowed thicket, every bend in the trail. Her breath fogged the air, but her eyes never stilled. Amos kept his rifle across his knees, finger near the trigger. The silence between them was heavy, charged with unspoken dread. Why does Rackham want us so bad? Sarah asked abruptly, her voice cutting through the crunch of wheels on frozen mud. We ain't worth 2 bits. Amos watched the trail ahead. Ain't about worth. It's about owning. Men like him feed on it. He thought of Tate's smug legality, Holt's veiled warnings. Your locket's proof he cheated. Proof's dangerous. Cold Hollow looked bleaker under the leaden sky. Amos stopped the buckboard outside Gable's Mercantile, its windows fogged with condensation. Stay close, he ordered Sarah. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of pickling brine, dried beans, and coal oil. Mrs. Gable, a thin woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, stood behind the counter. Her smile faded when she saw Amos. "Read," she murmured, casting a nervous glance toward the street. "Heard you had visitors." She began gathering the supplies, salt, flour, shells, with hurried hands. As Amos counted coins, the bell above the door jangled. Sheriff Holt entered, stomping snow from his boots. His gaze swept over Amos, then lingered on Sarah. "Cold for a ride, Reed." His tone was neutral, but his eyes were watchful. Sarah glared back, unflinching. Before Amos could reply, the door burst open again. Coulter stood framed in the doorway, snow dusting his greasy duster. He grinned, teeth yellowed. "Well, looky here." Reed and his little shadow. He swaggered toward the counter, reeking of tobacco and sweat. Sarah tensed, edging behind Amos. Mrs. Gable froze, a can of peaches clutched to her chest. Coulter picked up a twist of tobacco, ignoring Amos. "Mr. Rackham's getting impatient, Reed. Wonders when you'll settle that debt." He leaned close, his voice a low growl. "Or maybe he'll take payment in kind. Here one of them sisters is right pretty." His eyes slid to Sarah. Amos's hand shot out, gripping Coulter's wrist. The store air crackled. "Touch her," Amos said, his voice dangerously soft, "and I'll bury you where the wolves won't find the pieces." Holt stepped between them, hand on his Colt. "Enough, Coulter. Get out." Coulter smirked, wrenching his arm free. "This ain't over, Reed." He tossed coins at Mrs. Gable and sauntered out. Holt sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "You're making it worse, Reed." He lowered his voice. "Rackham's got friends in Helena. Judges. You can't fight paper with lead. He left without another word. Mrs. Gable pressed a small cloth bundle into Amos's hand as he gathered his sacks. "Extra shells," she whispered, "and jerky for the girls." Her eyes held pity and fear. "He owns the sheriff, Reed. Be careful." The return journey felt longer. Snow fell steadily now, blanketing the trail in deceptive softness. Sarah huddled deeper into her coat, silent. Amos's mind raced. Rackham's reach, Holt's complicity, the Locket's damning scrap of paper. They were halfway home when the bay mare shied violently. Amos hauled on the reins, scanning the trees. Nothing moved but falling snow. "What?" Sarah began. A rifle shot split the silence. The bullet whined past Amos's ear, splintering the buckboard sideboard. "Down!" Amos roared, shoving Sarah to the floorboards. He snatched his rifle, peering into the white-shrouded pines. Two figures on horseback emerged from the tree-line ahead. Coulter and a lean, hard-faced man Amos didn't recognize. Coulter levered another round into his Winchester. "Told you it ain't over, Reed," he shouted. "Hand over the girl, and we'll make it quick." Amos cocked his rifle, aiming for Coulter's horse. Before he could fire, Sarah scrambled up beside him. Her face was pale, but her eyes blazed with the same defiance she'd shown on the auction block. She snatched the Navy revolver from Amos's belt, the one he'd left with Hannah. It was too heavy for her, but she braced it on the buckboard's edge, fingers trembling but determined. Amos stared, stunned. "Sarah, no." She didn't hesitate. The revolver bucked in her hands with a deafening roar. The shot went wide, kicking up snow near the horse's hooves. But it made Coulter duck, his aim faltering. The lean man cursed, raising his own rifle. Sarah's voice cut to the ringing silence, high and clear and sharp as broken glass. "You want me?" she screamed at Coulter, the gun still smoking in her grip. "Come and take me." The wind howled, carrying her challenge into the teeth of the storm. Coulter's eyes widened not in fear, but in surprise and cold, predatory interest. The lean man sighted down his barrel, aiming straight at Sarah's heart. Snowflakes settled on the revolver's cold steel like a shroud. The lean man's rifle sight centered on Sarah's chest. Snowflakes clung to the barrel like frozen tears. Time compressed to a single, breathless heartbeat. Amos didn't think. He lunged sideways, shoving Sarah hard off the buckboard bench into the deep snowbank below. The rifle cracked. Splinters exploded where Sarah's head had been. Amos returned fire, his Winchester's roar echoing through the pines. The shot clipped the lean man's shoulder, spinning him backward in the saddle with a grunt of pain. Coulter cursed, firing wildly as a spooked horse reared. Amos seized the moment, snapping the reins. The bay mare plunged forward, hooves churning snow. "Sarah, run!" Amos bellowed. He saw her scramble up, coated in white, eyes wide with terror but unhurt. She stumbled alongside the moving buckboard. Amos reached down, hauling her aboard by her coat collar as another bullet whined past. He whipped the mare into a frantic gallop, leaning low. Behind them, Coulter's furious shouts faded into the swirling snowstorm. They bought seconds, not safety. The ride back was a blur of white panic. Sarah huddled on the floorboards, shaking violently, her defiant bravado shattered. Snow plastered her hair, melted into icy rivulets down her face. Amos scanned the trail constantly, rifle ready, expecting pursuit at every bend. The cold bit deeper now, a physical manifestation of the dread coiling in his gut. Rackham's patience had snapped. This wasn't intimidation. It was open war. Hannah must have heard the shots. As the buckboard careened into the cabin clearing, she stood on the porch, Amos's Navy revolver held in both trembling hands, pointed towards the trail. Rose peeked from behind her skirts. The carved wooden horse clutched tight. Relief flooded Hannah's face when she saw them, quickly replaced by fresh terror at Amos's grim expression and Sarah's state. "Inside! Now!" Amos barked, Leaping down, unharnessed the mare with frantic speed. He didn't bother with the corral. He led the sweating, frightened animal straight into the relative shelter of the barn, barring the heavy door behind him. Sabotage was his first fear. Feed poison, tack cut, but everything seemed intact. For now, back in the cabin, Hannah had bolted the door. She was trying to peel Sarah's frozen coat off. Sarah sat rigidly on a stool by the fire, staring blankly at the flames, her teeth chattering. Rose pressed a tin cup of lukewarm broth into her hands. "Drink, Sarah," she whispered, her own voice thin with fear. Amos checked the window shutters, his movements sharp, efficient. The fragile normalcy of the past days was incinerated. Coulter's words echoed, "He'll take payment in kind." They'd aim for Sarah. Later, by the meager light of the oil lamp, Sarah spoke. Not defiant, but hollow. "He wanted me," she murmured, staring into her untouched broth. "Coulter said I was right, pretty." Her voice cracked. Hannah flinched, her hand instinctively going to the tarnished locket hidden beneath her dress. Rose whimpered, clutching her carved horse tighter. Hannah stood abruptly. Her face was pale, but a new resolve hardened her eyes. She walked to Amos, who was cleaning his Winchester at the table. She opened the locket, not with tenderness, but with the grim purpose of revealing a weapon. She pointed to the debt note beside the faded tintype. "Papa didn't just owe money," she said, her voice low and fierce. "He borrowed from Helena's savings, but Tate brought Rackham in when the harvest failed. Rackham offered a loan extension." Her finger traced a spidery transfer line. "Transferred to S. Rackham. Papa refused at first. Then the wagon axle broke." Her voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "On that steep ravine trail. Papa checked that axle the morning we left. It was sound." She snapped the locket shut, the click final. "Rackham didn't just want the land. He wanted us. Tate told him we were biddable, especially Sarah." She looked at her sister, shivering by the fire. "He breaks things. People, then owns the pieces." Amos absorbed the cold, calculated evil of it. The debt was a noose. The auction was meant to deliver them straight into Rackham's hands. His purchase hadn't settled anything. It had stolen Rackham's property. The locket wasn't just proof of debt. It was evidence of murder. "He won't stop," Amos stated, the weight of it settling like stone. He looked at each sister, Hannah's protective fury, Sarah's traumatized defiance, Rose's trembling innocence. Clara's face superimposed itself over Rose's for a heartbeat. Never again. The vow wasn't just memory. It was a battle cry. "We can't stay." Dawn brought no respite. Only a world smothered under heavy, oppressive snow. Visibility shrank to yards. Amos used the cover scout. He found them near the creek. Fresh boot prints, at least 3 pairs, circling the cabin, testing the tripwires. One set stopped beneath the reinforced kitchen window shutter. Scratches marred the wood near the latch, a failed attempt to pry it open. They'd come in the night, while he'd stood watch at the front. The message was clear. They were surrounded, watched, and Rackham's patience was gone. The cabin wasn't a fortress. It was a tomb waiting to be sealed. Desperation forced a plan. They needed an ally, someone beyond Rackham's immediate reach. Mrs. Gable's fearful sympathy in the mercantile was their only flicker of hope. Getting the cold hollow, unseen through the snow, was near impossible, unless they created a diversion. "The barn," Amos said grimly, outlining it to Hannah as Sarah listened, her eyes regaining some of their flint. "We set it alight. The smoke, the light, it draws them. We slip out the back, through the pines, to the old trapper's path." It was a thin, overgrown trail leading towards town, hidden from the main road. Risky, but staying meant death, or worse. Preparations were made in tense silence. Amos packed essentials. Ammunition, jerky, the precious locket tucked deep in his coat. Hannah bundled Rose in every scrap of warm clothing they had. Sarah sharpened Amos's skinning knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic scrape, scrape, scrape a grim counterpoint to the howling wind. She tested the edge with her thumb, then tucked it into her boot. Her gaze met Amos's. No words were needed. She was ready to fight. As dusk painted the snow violet, Amos doused the barn's interior wall with coal oil. He handed Hannah a lit pine knot. Her hand shook, but her jaw was set. Rose clung to her leg, burying her face in Hannah's skirt. The carved horse pressed between them. Sarah stood guard at the cabin's back door, peering into the swirling snow, Amos's Navy revolver heavy in her grip. "Now!" Amos whispered. Hannah thrust the torch. Flames roared up the oil-soaked with terrifying speed, hungrily consuming dry hay and timber. Orange light exploded against the twilight, casting monstrous, dancing shadows. Smoke billowed, thick and acrid, into the snowy sky. A beacon. "Go!" Amos hissed. He grabbed Rose, Hannah close behind, Sarah bringing up the rear, pistol aimed towards a tree lean. They plunged into the deep snow behind the cabin, heading for the dense wall pines where the hidden trail began. The crackle of the fire grew louder, an angry roar punctuated by the panicked screams of the horses trapped inside the barn. Amos's heart clenched. The bay mare, the sturdy workhorses, but he didn't slow. Human lives outweighed animal ones. They'd made it 50 yards into the pines, the fire's glow illuminating their path through the trees, when a figure materialized in the swirling snow ahead, blocking the narrow trail. Not Coulter, not the lean man. This man was older, thick-bodied, wrapped in a fine bearskin coat that spoke of money, not frontier grit. His face was broad, clean-shaven, and utterly devoid of warmth, like stone polished by ice. He held a fancy, nickel-plated revolver casually at his side. His eyes, small and dark as river pebbles, swept over them with chilling calculation, lingering on Sarah, then Hannah, before settling on Amos. Well, Amos Reed, Silas Rackham said, his voice a smooth, cold drawl that cut through the fire's roar and the wind's howl. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The sheer, oppressive weight of his presence froze them in their tracks. Burning down your own place? That's a mite drastic. He took a slow step forward, his boots sinking silently into the deep snow. Saves me the trouble, I suppose. Now, about my property. He raised a revolver, not aiming, just displaying it, a predator toying with corner prey. His gaze locked onto Hannah's throat, where the locket chain glinted faintly in the firelight. And my proof. The snow seemed to fall heavier, the cold deepening, as the flames consumed Amos's past and Rackham blocked their only future. Rose's tiny whimper was the only sound in the sudden, suffocating silence. Silas Rackham stood before them, a mountain of bearskin and menace blocking the narrow trail. The barn's inferno painted his clean-shaven face in hellish hues, snowflakes hissing as they touched the nickel-plated revolver in his hand. His dark eyes, cold as river stones, locked onto Hannah's throat where the locket chain gleamed. "My property," he repeated, the smooth drawl cutting to the fire's roar and Rose's whimper. "And my proof." He took another step, sinking deeper into the snow. The air thickened, heavy with the scent of burning pine and impending violence. Behind them, trapped horses screamed in the barn. Ahead, annihilation waited. Amos shifted, positioning his body between Rackham and the sisters. His mind raced. No clear shot, Coulter and the lean man likely closing in from flames. Sarah, still gripping Amos's heavy Navy revolver, trembled but didn't lower it. Hannah's hand tightened around Rose's shoulder, her other instinctively covering the locket. Desperation choked Amos. Clara, never again. The vow wasn't just memory. It was a tether to this moment. He couldn't fight them all, but he could buy time. Proof. Amos's voice scraped out, rough as granite. He kept his own Colt holstered, hands open at his sides. A show of calm. That scrap in the locket? Tate's crooked ink won't save you when the law sees it alongside a broken wagon axle. He nodded toward Hannah. "Tell him, girl. Tell him what your pa saw before they died." Hannah's eyes widened, then hardened. She understood. Evidence needed witnesses. Voice shaking but clear, she shouted over the wind, "Papa, check the axle." Morning we left. It was sound. She fumbled with the locket, snapping it open, holding it high like a shield. The debt note fluttered in the fire-lit wind. "You had it cut, Rackham. Tate told you we were biddable, so you murdered them." Rackham's polished veneer cracked. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Lies from a thieving child," he snarled, raising his revolver. But his gaze flickered past them, toward the fire. Distracted, Sarah acted, not with a gun, but with a raw, guttural cry. She threw herself sideways into the deep snow, rolling, coming up with a fistful of icy slush. She hurled it straight at Rackham's face. It was a child's move, desperate, but it worked. He flinched, swiping at his eyes, his shot going wide, splintering a pine branch overhead. The distraction was enough. Amos drew, firing twice at Rackham's legs. Snow erupted near the man's boots as he stumbled back, but movement erupted from the tree lean. Coulter and a lean man, drawn by the chaos, rifles raised. "Take the dark-haired one alive." Rackham bellowed. Spitting snow, a shadow detached itself from the pines beside the trail. Not another enemy. Sheriff Holt stepped into the firelight, his own Winchester leveled at Rackham. His face was haggard, his stance rigid. "Enough, Silas." Holt's voice was a whip crack. "Heard every word." "So, did he?" He jerked his head toward a gaunt, buckskin-clad figure beside him. Jedediah Crane, a reclusive trapper known for his honesty and disdain for town politics. Crane's rifle was trained on Coulter. Rackham froze, incredulous. "Holt, you siding with this dirt grubber?" "Side with the law," Holt retorted, his pale eyes burning. "Heard Hannah. Saw that note. Crane here saw the axle splinter clean after it was hauled from the ravine." He took a step forward, his aim unwavering on Rackham's chest. "Tate's singing like a canary in my jail right now. Turns out he don't like being the fall guy for murder. Sold you out, Silas. Sold you all out." Rackham's face purpled. Betrayal and rage contorted his features. "You think paper and a trapper's word beat mine? I own judges in Helena." "Not anymore," Holt stated flatly. Telegraph wires humming. "Marshal's coming. Your friends are scrambling like rats." He glanced at Amos, a flicker of something, regret, maybe respect, in his eyes. "It's over, Silas." Drop the iron. For a heartbeat, the world hung suspended. The barn's roof collapsed in a shower of sparks. Rose buried her face in Hannah's skirt, the carved horse digging into her palm. Sarah crouched in the snow, the Navy revolver still aimed, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Amos watched Rackham's finger tighten on the trigger. Not at Holt, but at Hannah. Amos didn't hesitate. He fired. The shot echoed, sharp and final. Rackham jerked backward, a dark bloom spreading across the fine bearskin over his shoulder. Not fatal, but disarming. His revolver thudded into the snow. Coulter lunged, but Crane's rifle barked once, kicking up snow at his feet. Next one center mass. Crane rasped. Coulter froze, hands slowly rising. The lean man, clutching his wounded shoulder, sagged against a tree, defeated. Silence descended, broken only by the dying fire's crackle and the wind's mournful howl. Holt moved swiftly, disarming Rackham and Coulter, securing their hands with rawhide ties. Rackham spat blood into the snow, his dark eyes filled with venom, fixed on Amos. "This ain't finished, Reed." "It is for you," Holt said grimly, hauling him upright. He nodded to Crane. "Help me get this trash to town." He looked at Amos, then at the sisters huddled together. Cabin still standing. Fire didn't reach it. Got a long winter ahead. He paused, his gaze lingering on Hannah's locket, now safely tucked away. Paperwork will be sorted. Debts void. Tate confessed. Rackham's done. He didn't offer apologies. None were needed. His actions spoke. Dawn bled pale gold across the snow-smothered valley. The barn was a blackened skeleton, wisps of smoke still curling into the frigid air. The bay mare and workhorses, freed by Holt and Crane during the night, huddled in the corral, coats singed but alive. Inside the cabin, warmth slowly seeped back. Hannah stirred a pot of porridge, her movements less mechanical, her shoulders less rigid. Sarah carefully cleaned Amos's Navy revolver at the table, her earlier defiance tempered by a quiet, hard-won exhaustion. Rose sat on the hearth rug, the carved wooden horse in one hand, the faded blue ribbon smoothed in her lap. Amos stood at the window, watching the sunrise paint the distant peaks in rose and amber. The weight that had crushed his chest since Clara's death felt different. Not gone, but shared. He turned. 3 pairs of eyes watched him. Hannah's steady, Sarah's wary but softer, Rose's wide and trusting. "What now?" Hannah asked softly. Not a demand, but a question for the first day of an uncertain future. Amos looked at them, the orphan sisters he bought for $10 in a vow. He saw their parents in Hannah's strength, Sarah's fire, Rose's quiet hope. He saw Clara in their resilience. He walked to the mantel, picking up the chipped enamel cup, Clara's cup. He filled it with hot coffee and handed it to Rose. Her small fingers wrapped around it, warming them. "Now," Amos said, his voice rough but clear in the quiet room, "we rebuild." He met Hannah's gaze. Together, he didn't say family. The word was too fragile, too scarred. But the meaning hung in the air, solid as the logs around them. Hannah's lips curved, the faintest ghost of a smile. Sarah gave a curt nod, returning the clean revolver to its holster on the wall. Rose held up the carved horse, its simple shape catching the morning light filtering through the window. "For luck," she whispered again, but this time it sounded like a promise. Outside, the wind still blew cold across the Montana territory, but inside the cabin, for the first time in a long, long while, Amos Reed felt the cautious, resilient warmth of hope. The winter would be hard, but they would face it, not as property, not as debts, but as survivors bound by a quiet widower's unexpected reason, a vow to the past, and a chance for the future.